All right, let's keep working on the smaller version of the OmniFood project. Now, first of all, we need to get rid of this nav_open class in our HTML because by default, of course, we don't want it. So we want the mobile navigation, of course, to not be visible. Okay, so let's go to our very last breakpoint that we set here. So that's right here. So here everything looks good. And so let's go down maybe to something like 700, maybe, just to see if everything is still okay here. And so here again, everything starts to look really cramped, and it starts to look as if we might need some more space here, so some more width for these 3 columns. And so maybe it's time to now give each of these columns here half of the space and wrap this one into the next column. But let's see. So here everything is good because it has a lot of space now. Here as well. And now here, these pricing tables, they're also starting to get way too thin. And the same probably here. So this is not looking so good anymore. And yeah, the same thing actually here in the footer. So let's see if we can reduce it a bit more even. But yeah, that makes everything even worse. And I think we shouldn't wait until a width like this in order to fix the problems that we just saw. So maybe something like 700 is the right width to start adding a next breakpoint. All right, so let's do just that. So still in our queries.css file. So add media max width. And as always, we need to convert that to m. So dividing by 16, and let's round that to 44. And so 44 is then 704 pixels. So that looks ideal. So 44 m. And then let's just get that standard comment that we have here. So this one was for tablets. And now the next one, let's say, is like for smaller tablets. So below 704 pixels. And here we are, of course, missing that block. And okay. So this is our next media query. And let me quickly just go back here, just to show you what I want to do. So basically everything that is 4 and 3 columns in our grid. So this one, for example, is 4 columns. This one here is 3 columns. And I think that's actually it. But if we had, of course, a bigger page, then we would reuse those classes more. And so we would have more and more grids that had 3 columns and that had 4 columns. But anyway, what I'm saying is that we will now transform these grids that have 3 and 4 columns to just 2 columns, right? And so then we will have basically these 2 cards here side by side and this list here below that. And then here we will end up with a 2 by 2 grid. So with then 2 columns and 2 rows to accommodate these 4 features, right? So let's see here. And so that's the grid 3 calls and the grid 4 calls. Now this one here we didn't even use. And while I'm not deleting it, just commenting it out. But if we did use it, then we would also now make this here into just a 2-column grid. Okay, and the same for 4. And so let's actually copy all of this here as well. And replace the 4, of course, with 2. And that's it. So just one single line of code, and we have a 2 by 2 grid here all of a sudden. So you see that? That's a lot better like this. It has a lot more space. and the same probably here. Right? So here we are back to some beautiful cars, and even if we scale it down a little bit more, we will still have plenty of space for all of this content here, even at a low width of just 500 in a bit. Right? Now here, this just creates visually a small problem that this would look better if it was centered right here. Right? But, well, that shouldn't be too hard. Let me just inspect this part to show it to you. So I want to show you the entire grid. So this is what our grid looks like. And so all we need to do is to have this column here span all the way to the end. So span these two, and then we can simply align the content that is inside of the cell to the center, right? So let's do that. So let's grab the name from here. So that is called the, well, it's actually not here. Let's see right here in the HTML then. So section meals and meal, and this is the one. So diets, which we didn't yet select in the style.css. But let's now, of course, manipulate that here. And so let's do what I just said previously, which is to span this column all the way to the end of the grid. So that is, remember, grid column. And then we can say that it should start at 1 all the way to the end, which is, remember, -1. Right? So for now, that still looks the same. But now this element here, so you see, now it is actually occupying this entire space. And so now all we need to do is to say justify self. So remember that justify is for the horizontal alignment, and self is because we are setting this now on the individual grid item and not on the grid container. And so then we use self and not justify item. So let's set that to center. And there we go. And if we now analyze this, then it looks a lot better because this content here is also centered. And yeah, it makes a lot more sense here like this now. Now, what I'm also noticing is that the spacing here after the H2 is starting to look too big as well. So this one right here. So let's fix that. We already have that somewhere up here. Just so I remember also what value we gave it. So heading secondary, and actually all we did was to change the font size, not the spacing. So I thought we had done that, but apparently not. So the heading secondary has a margin bottom of 9.6. So that's a lot. Let's just try to reduce that to half here. So that's 4.8 rem in our system. And yeah, that looks quite good. And we could, of course, fix more and more things, like make this one here also smaller, also decrease the spacing here. And we might do that maybe in the next media query. But for now, I will just leave it like this because, well, I'm also not trying to make it 100% perfect here. Because this is just a learning project in the end. So there's no need for it to be 100% perfect. Okay, it just needs to like look usable at least. All right, so here everything is still fine, I would say. Then here, of course, now this looks quite bad. So looks bad here, and also at this point where we start actually the breakpoint. But remember that we need to cover at least like 200 pixels or 150 at least. And so, yeah, this should also look at least quite okay here, which of course it doesn't. And so remember, once again, if we inspect these pricing plans here, that we made each of them only 75% wide, right? So if we remove that, then they would be back to 100%. And so then it does look nice again, right? And so let's basically do that. So pricing plan and set the width back to 100%. So width 100%, and that should do the trick. While here is a typo, right? Pricing plan. Well, that didn't really work. Oh, and actually I already had a typo here before. So this is called pricing plan everywhere in the HTML and in the CSS. So, well, am I gonna fix that? Yeah, maybe I should fix that. So let's call it pricing plan here. So meal, then printing. So that was a typo. The same here. And that's it. Now just let's fix it quickly. Also in the HTML, of course. So after the gallery, so that's here, and here, and here, and here. Okay, great. Now that works. So you see, we reach our breakpoint, and now that is a lot better. Okay, moving on even further, and here we start getting some next problems. Maybe not here yet, but if we take it down even more, then actually this content doesn't even fit at all, and it disappears here in the right side. And now we cannot even scroll there anymore because we just hit that overflow X in the previous lecture. Remember that? And so now it disappears completely, basically from our page. So how are we going to fix that? Well, the idea that I got is to basically move these three here. So basically these three navigation columns to the top. So have them first here. And then after that, I will want the logo column here and the contact data column below that. However, that sounds easier at first than it actually is, because I still want these two columns here to have the same width, and I still want these three here to also have the same width. So we cannot simply define a grid with three columns, because that would only work for these three, but not for these two. And let me actually show you that in practice, because that makes it easier to understand the problem. So here in the footer, right now we have this grid with 5 columns. So let's grab this here and change it just to 3 columns for now. All right, so that makes it look like this. But remember how we want these 3 here to actually be the first 3 columns. Or in other words, we want these 3 here to be in the first row, right? So we can do that because we actually gave them a class. Well, we didn't select it here apparently, but there is a class name there, I remember. So let's move down there. Yeah, so here we have the address call. And then here we have the 3 nav calls. Right, so nav call, and nav call. So again, I think we don't have them selected anywhere here. Nope, but let's do that now here. And so what I said previously is that we want them to be in the first row. And so we can, for all of them, say grid row 1, right? And that's actually it. And so now they are right here beautifully sitting at the top, 1 column for each of them, and then these 2 here below them. However, that is again not exactly what we want, because now we want these 2 here to basically occupy the remaining space. However, there is only 1 grid cell left here on the right side. Well, not this one here, but here. So we only have one grid cell left, which we cannot really split up for half here and half here, right? That does not work. And so what we need to do instead is to create a grid with 6 columns. And then we have each of these columns here to span across 2 columns, and these 2 here span across 3 columns. And so that will then fix it. So that's a trick that we actually have to do all the time when we build kind of an asymmetric grid like what we're going for here. So let me show you what I mean here. So let's use actually the repeat function. So repeat 6 times 1fr. And so for now, of course, that looks like this. But now here we will say that we want each of them to be in grid column. And then here we can simply say span across 2. All right. And that did already work, even though it doesn't look like it. So now here we have this empty one. So you see that this one here is spanning across these 2 and these 2 and these 2. They simply do not have the same width right now, these columns, because the content down here does not allow for that. So let's fix that very quick. And so what I want is to select the logo call and also the other one. So the address call. So logo call and this one here, we want them to span across 3 columns. So span 3. Let's inspect that. And beautiful. Let's actually turn this view off. We can just reload. And there we go. And so now this is exactly what we were going for. Right? So these 2 are now basically sharing half the space here, while these other 3 are sharing the space up here. There's just not enough space here right now. So we could go ahead and increase the gap, but that gap is actually coming from somewhere else. So it is coming from the grid itself. And so I do not want to mess with that. So let me simply add some margin to the bottom of these 3. So that's here 3.2 RAM maybe. And that's a bit better. So before everything looked a bit cramped and we didn't have like enough space around this logo there. Okay, great. So that actually looks really nice even at the slower width. So this is really a great footer. It still looks professionally designed. Right. Now here maybe not so good anymore, but we're also getting ahead of ourselves. All we did here was to work on this breakpoint, and so that works good during all of these width here. So all the way down, for example, to 600. Right? So well done here. We're doing a great job of making this page responsive, and I think we will only need one more breakpoint here to really finish this part. So only a breakpoint for smaller phones are now missing. And so that is exactly what we're going to add in the next and final lecture of this section.